Hello, this is a new tutorial. I'd like to talk about the new input system from Unreal VR template 5.1. Since the update to 5.1, there's a new input system, which is quite different from the old the project settings. If you recall, in the older version, if you want to customize input like a binding, you have to do things right here. But since the update, this will be expired eventually, and there's a new input system. I believe is more robust, and I'd like to talk a little bit about this whole system. Um, Before I start, I do want to mention there's a few links I'd like you guys to watch, and I will provide the link here in the tutorial later. The first one is from the MetaQuest, basic terminologies about the VR input. You should get a good understanding about what are the different triggers, means different buttons, what is this knob, how we call the stick, some stick means, and how many status this each button or each stick has. So keep in mind the front trigger actually has two. One is the press and release. Another one is the touch. So whenever you have your finger touched to the front, it's actually register a touch. So it's a really um, robust and sensitive. The same thing for the two face buttons. We call X, Y, and A, B on each controller. And this one also has this touch function. So that's the reason when you actually touch the button, if you do not press or release, it still be able to register. So in the VR, it will render as a finger move. So just read this carefully. Another link also I'm gonna provide to you later with the link is the um, instructions or the document from Unreal talk about this enhanced input system. So make sure you read this again, understand the terminologies. Okay, so for me, I will just start directly with a diagram. I think this is the best way to understand what is the new input system. Um, if you recall in the original older version, every input is in the project settings. The problem is if you have many different game mode loaded over time, the project settings and input could become really long. Right, this could have like a dozen of different input mapping system. It's a little bit confusing because when you associate particular mapping with a level, you only care about that mapping in that level context. You don't really care about other type. So it will be actually much easier in the new version. Everything is based on the context. So here in the diagram, I have this to illustrate the hierarchies. So first one, or we call it in the highest hierarchy, you have this config. This is called the PMI, player mappable input config file. This file basically just communicate with the entire project. Hey, this is several contexts I want to establish. So this is called PMI config file. The config file, you can definitely find it in the VR template in the folder called input. It has this PMI config file. So this is the file. If you double click, basically that's just point to the collection of contexts. Okay, so this is the kind of group of inputs. Right, so this is called PMI file. You should also make sure in the project settings, you do have a way to point to that PMI file. I believe that is in the input, and um, and here, I forgot where you point to the PMI. Let's go back to my diagram. Oh, it's in the OpenXR input plugin. Okay, so let's go there. Okay, so in the plugins and OpenXR input, right? This is the name. In older version, this is actually called a plugin, but it's basically just a pointer to, hey, I want to load this PMI into the project, right? So when I package, this PMI will be embedded into the build. You want to also make sure in the input we are already switched to the new class. So here we are using the enhanced player input class. Okay, so just keep in mind this is all this is the new one, but there you have the option to switch to the older version if you want. Okay, so this is all the connections between the PMI to the project. Then let's talk a little bit about input binding using context. Context, as I said, is a group. Basically, is a collection of different input actions. And here in Unreal, you can see using the VR template input folder as example, you have multiple these context file. Right, this is called IMC default. This is actually the one being used in this level. So if I double click, you can see in this context file, it has several actions, right? This is called actions. Back to the diagram, this is called individual actions. And actions basically is the original, in the input you have axes, you have action buttons. So this is all kind of underneath the actions. Right? This is all here. So in a context file, is basically just load individual actions into this context. So for example, in this VR template, right, this is the the VR headset. You are able to see your hands. You are able to grab objects. You are able to move around, right, using teleport. So this is the context associated with this level, and you have this action name called move, action name called turn, grab left, grab right, toggle left, toggle right. This is actually control the pop-up menu. So if you remember this name, and then if you take a look at the actual actions, you have these individual actions, right? So for example, in a action called move, if I double click, you'll see this action has a very basic definition on what type of values it is. This one is axis 1D. So that basically means in the motion controller, I will using my right hand as example. We'll see that some stick, it has a two axes to move, right? X and Y. So if you define this value as 1D, basically just indicate this is one axis rather than two axes. But you could have the option to switch to 2D. In some devices, give you the 3D. Okay. Because the teleport function is only teleport forward, you cannot really move sideways. It's actually reasonable just do the axis 1D. Okay. You can also add modifiers on top. So that zone basically is a filter which can trim some of these values if it's too low or too high. So that is some additional functions you can add on top of the on top of the values from your input. Another modifier is called positive only. So you can only register the positive values from this y-axis. Right? So this is some filters, some additional parameters you can add uh, to individual actions. So this is called actions. I can use another one as example. For example, the toggle, right? Or we call the toggle right or toggle right left. So this is basically face button. Press, it pop up that context menu. So double click, you can see it registered as a bool. So that means it only gives true or false. It depends on you pressed, released, right? So that is the value for the bool. But in some other contexts, let me see. I did a new one. Later, I will do a tutorial how to do this. Or you can, so here, if I do the move, smooth locomotion, you see here I define the value as a 2D. So right, give you both x and y axis. Okay, so that is a kind of flexibilities you have when you define the input actions. You can add modifiers. You can define the values, right? Bool, 1D, 2D, or 3D. So this is about action. I do want to mention is when you add these individual actions into a context, you have to give a list of keys, buttons, axes directly in the context file. So I label this as a green color. So here, if I go to the context file, I'm using the move as example. Underneath the move, you can see this is actually the buttons and the keys, right? Or we call axes. And here you have different devices, Oculus, HTC Vive, Microsoft MR. So there's a bunch of buttons you can mapping. So for the turn, this is the snap turn is basically the axis. X-axis means left and right, right? You can register as a snap turn. And also, if you look at the grab, right, the grab basically using the grip to trigger. So the grip is on the side, right? So when you press and release, you can trigger that grip to fire the grab action. Same thing for the grab left, grab right is very similar. And also you have this manual toggle. The manual toggle basically allow you using a face button, right, to open up additional menus. So you can see the for Oculus Touch is a B press. For Oculus Touch here is the manual press, right? So this is the called the manual button, right? Manual button here, right? So you have really a diverse way you can add additional functions. So for example, if you want to add another button to trigger the toggle left, just click add. So you have this additional one, then you can maybe find Oculus Touch, then you have this list of the way to trigger it. If you're not familiar with this terminology, again, refer to my link here. So it discusses a lot about what each button will do, what kind of values it allow you to input. Okay, so just add a new one. So for me, I don't really need this one. I will just click delete. So it's not adding that one in. Okay, so this is the logic behind the context file. You can add actions, and for each action, you can add additional keys. So for action, for example, if I want to add a new action, let me just close this one. All right, so if I want to add another new actions, I can click add, right? Then here I can choose this additional action. So maybe I want to create, I don't know, a jump. So this is actually predefined. In another tutorial, I will teach you from scratch how to start a new context file and how to set up a new action file and how to link them together. But this is really the location you can define. Hey, I want to do something new. For example, I want to do a new local motion, a local. I think I did a LA move, and I think I did a move SM means a smooth local motion, and here you can add additional triggers and how exactly these keys axes will be associated with this action, right? So you can definitely do that. So that means this file now have a smooth local motion as action. But I will teach this in a separate tutorial. So now let me just simply delete. Okay, so this is my current default VR template context file and action file, right? Then let's talk a little bit how exactly this is being loaded into a pawn, into a character. So again, I'm using the BP pawn, the current VR pawn as example. So we can take a look at the logic, right? So here in the word settings, I have the default pawn class is called VR pawn. If I click search, I can find this VR pawn, right? So let me save everything, just make sure we are not crash and lost files. So the VR pawn, if I double click, I'm able to open this VR pawn, right? This is from default 5.1. The difference between this to the older version is you have now the hand, which is really nice. If I zoom in, you can actually see the hands is right there. So this is the hand. And it's a skeletal mesh. It has animation associated with it. Is really nice because now you have 5 fingers. You are able to see how this gonna interact with grab functions or click functions. It's really nice. So that's about hand. It also has the older like aim associated with the hands. It also has the HMD now, which basically a representation of your head mount display. It's the same as the older version. Yeah, so that is the kind of logic, right? Just keep in mind, this one is actually a pawn. It's not a character. That's the reason there's no movement component attached with it. The reason is this default pawn is using the teleportation as a way to move. So it's not really need any movement component. It doesn't have really a skeletal mesh like a running first person or third person with it. So that's the reason it has a pawn as a parent class. But in the future, if you want to switch this to a different class, theoretically you can do this through by choosing a different parent blueprint. But we'll do that later in a different setting. All right. So now if I look at the event graph, let's go through really quick about the logic. So when you set up this play for the first time, it will do a bunch of things to set up the tracking system. Um, it does using the stage, but you have the option to do eye level or floor level, depends. So later we need to switch to the eye level when we switch to the pawn to the character. Also, this one is pretty interesting. It has a console command to control the pixel density. If your machine is not able to handle, you could actually reduce the pixel dimension, pixel density here. Then there is another setting to control the enhanced input local system. And here is very important. You want to make sure this VR pawn is loading the correct context, right? In this case, it's called IMC default. If I roll over, you can actually see the path, right? The file structure to this is under game VR template input C default, right? So this is the location. If I search, this is the location for this context. Okay. You might see other contexts like a hands and a menu. This context is not loaded into the VR pawn because VR pawn don't really care about the weapon system, don't care about the hand and this hand animation for now. But in the future, when you load, grab the weapons or trigger the hand, then they have their own context system to kick in. So just keep in mind, this is a place you're loading the correct context. If you don't do it, the context will not be activated, and you are not able to communicate between the pawn to the actual context. You are not able to trigger these actions. Okay, so that is the logic behind. All right, so let's take a look at the next one. Oh, the next one actually we did the hands here as well. So it's actually add 2 contacts into the VR pawn. Sorry for that. Yeah, I saw there's only 1, but there's 2, because the hand is a part of this new VR pawn now. Yeah, since 5.1. Okay, so keep in mind hands is contacts being loaded. So there are 2 contacts being loaded into this VR pawn. If you want to take a look at the hands, right, contacts, search. So here you see the hand contacts. You can see a bunch of actions associated with each, right, associated with these contacts. And there is a triggers to indicate how to register the hand movement. So for example, the index curve, right, which indicate you are moving your index finger, and this is actually being triggered in Oculus with the left trigger axis, right? So here you can see the front axis register your index. The sum should be very easy to understand. The sum up, right? Sum up is registered through touch, right? So if you touch Oculus touch with a Y button, with a thumb stick, with the X. So they all register as your thumb. So there's 1, 2, 3. Either of these three buttons or axes, right, sticks will register your thumb. So that's the logic behind the hand context. All right, I think that's pretty much about the logic here. Let's go back to the palm. So this context is loaded into the palm. Then the next thing is what you do with it, right? So here you can see the very familiar input actions. This is very similar like the older version. You basically type the name of the input, then it will give you that event trigger, right? So this is called IA. IA stands for input action. IA turn. You can see this is actually here in actions. You see the IA turn. Right? This is the snap turn. Right? So here you register that. To load this event trigger, you can do just type the name. IA turn, right? So it's give you, hey, this is the name of that. Then you click, you load this as a trigger. Then you can fire the event, right? Fire the actions from this trigger. The status for each, I don't want to expand too much. I think this is actually being covered pretty nicely in this Unreal document. Talk about the meaning for each, right? Trigger, start, ongoing, complete, cancelled. What exactly this mean? Just make sure you read this. I don't want to repeat here. Okay, so that's about the input event. And here we have snap turn, right, which is trigger a function to turn. Also, you have the input action called teleport, right? This is triggered by move, right? Move is action. Then you're doing the teleport. This has a different status because you do want to see the trajectory of the curve, so that's being fired when you start. Okay, there's other like grab left, right, which is another one. Then you grab right. Okay, very easy to understand. Then you have this manual toggle left. This is how you can use the left to pop up the menu. And same thing, you have this hand grasp. Sorry, the you have the pop up on the left. This is the mirror from the right. Okay. You also have this a group of I would say the actions associated with hand animation. So this is the hand grasp. This is the hand index curl. So that's basically just register the different movement of your hand. Okay, so this is all here. Okay, so this is controlled hand animation. So to show you that, I will just simply fire the play so we can take a quick look. All right. I think you should be able to see my screen. So let's do that. I will fire. Well, let me stop the recording because I don't want to take the risk the computer crash. So let me stop really quick. Okay, so I have saved the previous video. I just want to make sure I have a backup. So now we can fire the play as a standalone. Okay, so I will go ahead wear the headset. Right, you should be able to see my default palm. And I will use only one hand. I'm trying to do that. Oops. This is my right. You can see my hand right here. And if I use my face button, right, this in this context, the A, B, or thumb stick, you see my thumb is actually being animated in VR because it's registered. And also the front trigger is actually control my index. So if I press, you can see my index finger is curved. For other three fingers, it registers through the grip, the side grip. So you can see they do react to me. So that's how this animation is being triggered. Okay. So the way you navigate is using the teleport. So if I press the thumbstick forward, you can see this, right? But I cannot really go backward. As I said, this is one dimension, 1D, right? And then you can grab this is exactly the same as the older version, and also you have this weapon you can grab, you can shoot, right? So this is the hand. The left hand, and I have to switch because I only have one hand available. So this is my left hand, and this has exactly the same kind of hand movement triggered by the different buttons, some sticks. But also I'm able to using the snap. So if I using the thumbstick along the axis, I'm able to push and rotate, right? So I'm able to turn 45 degrees each time. Okay, that's pretty handy. This is actually better than smooth rotation because people intend to get a motion sickness if you have shoulder transitions. Um, okay, and if you press the, I believe it's a manual button, you are able to toggle the menu. So the menu will allow you to use thumbstick. You are able to pick the options you wanna do. Okay, so this is the toggle menu to pop up. Okay, I think that's it about the um, how the hand is being rendered here in VR. And also, if I'm on exit, I can use the Oculus button. Right, this is the Oculus button click. Then I'm able to quit the app. Okay. Okay, it doesn't crash. That's good. Sometimes it give me the crash. That's it. This is how you register the you know different actions through this new mapping system, right? So you have the event action being loaded to trigger some action, and also you have to define which context you want to load at the beginning, right? That's the logic of this. I do want to mention really quick, since this is almost the end of this first tutorial, is there's a bunch of other game mode you can load it in. So in my case, I added, the package, and added the first person. I also added the third person in. Just keep in mind that you are okay if you want to adding them in. So basically, what they bring in is additional input options. So here in a third person, I added in. You see in the blueprint, you have this third person character, and also in the input, you have this context. Under the context, you have a bunch of options like jump, look around, move. Same thing for the first person added in. You have this input system, right? They have their own weapon system, default input. And it seems like Unreal is okay to have the file has exactly the same name. So this is also called IMC default. So this could be confusing. Just keep in mind if you have file exactly the same name. So my recommendation is make sure you have a description for each, a different description. Otherwise, this might causing the some bugs in the future. I guess not 100% sure. So if I know this one is associated with the first person, so I will just add a description called first person default. Okay, so there's no confusing about it. Save. And also, for some reason, you added a third person right into exactly the same project. Just make sure in the input for this context file, you do want to give this that's a that first person. I will do a third person default. Okay, so they all have a different name. Just separate them. That will be nice because in the future, if you load it here, for example, in the VR Pong, right? If I click the mapping context, there are several files has exactly the same name. Just make sure you roll over your cursor and read the actual path, right? Make sure you are not loading the wrong file. Otherwise, you might wonder why it doesn't work because you are loading the wrong file, right? They have exactly the same name. So this is the third person. This one is a VR template. Right? If you look at the path on the screen. All right. I think we pretty much covered everything. But I want to just show you really quick in the VR game mode because we did a third person, right? So let's just see if I switch to third person. and this player start gonna kick off a third person. I will do a select viewport, right? You see the third person show up. So now this input now like WASD, right, is control the move, and the mouse, right, is control the view, right, the camera's location. So this is a completely different input system. And if I take a look at the uh, Pong, right, you see this Pong is number one, a character. It has a movement, but more importantly, it has a way to load its own mapping system, which is the third person, right? Third person default context. That's the reason the input is all meaningful here for jump, for move. And also keep in mind, in the original project settings, we already delete everything from the axis and actions, right? So there's nothing here really driven the input. It's all controlled by the new context system. If I switch to first person, for example, and if I play, right, you have this first person view, right? This first person allow you to jump as well. Um, you know, you have a new mapping system. I don't think I need to repeat, but just show you really quick, right? The first person, if I search the first person, Pong, right? This is the character in the event graph. You'll see this is loading a different context file. The same name, that could be confusing, but it has a different path. Then the input is totally different. Okay. I think that's pretty much about the new system. In the next tutorial, I will talk more on how to customize this, maybe with a smooth locomotion. The reason behind that is, usually when you simulate a people move, um, we don't really teleport, right? And also, we don't really move horizontally or backwardly as fast as forward. We usually turn our body, right, before we move to a different direction. Um, so that's something we can discuss in the next one. Okay, so I hope this tutorial is useful for you to have a good understanding about the new kind of input mapping system. The bundling now depends on the different hierarchies, right? You have the PMI config file, then the config files loaded into different contexts, then the load into different actions. And the keys and buttons is embedded in the context. All right, I think that's it. Okay, so this is a new tutorial. I like to talk about smooth locomotion. It basically is a new way to move not through the teleport, but through just push the thumbstick. You can move forward, push back, you move backward. For the side, left and right, I will just using the snap rotation, because as I mentioned before, very rare you see us move horizontally. We usually rotate a little bit, then our body is facing a different direction, then we move, right? So we don't really move sideways very often. So I want to, that's the logic behind. We want to do a smooth locomotion for front and backwards, forward, backwards, and for the side, I will do a snap turn to rotate maybe 15 degrees each time. Okay, so that is the logic behind locomotion. Um, to do that, I will use my VR template as a starting point. But usually, I would recommend. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't change that. Control Z. I want to switch the game mode to VR template. Where is that? Okay, here is VR template. Okay, and you see by default the Pong is the VR Pong, right? If I search, it's right here. I would recommend do not change the original one. My habit is always duplicate a new one. So in case something goes wrong, you have this old one, you can go back, right? So don't destroy the old one. To do a smooth locomotion, I will just simply right click. I will duplicate, right? Just create a new VR Pong. And in this case, I give this new VR Pong a name called SM2. It means smooth locomotion 2, right? That's my new name. So that's the first thing you want to do. Refer to this diagram. I basically created this new Pong, which I can load with a different context. different actions. In fact, I think for the snap turn and for the hand movement, animation, they should be all the same, right? So you don't really have to start from scratch. In my opinion, did exactly the same strategy. I duplicate one of these old contacts, and in this old context, I will add additional actions to trigger the smooth locomotion. Okay, so same logic here. I go back to my input, and here you can see the default. Right, this is basically control, the snap turn, teleport, pop-up menus, hand animation. So I right click, I made a duplication. Right, so make sure you duplicate the context, and I gave this new context name called SM, is MC default SM. Right, so this is my new context. Okay, so make sure you're not destroy the old one. All right, so in my new context, if I double click, I have all the old ones, automatically duplicated from previous one, but I deleted the one of these original input from the list, which is called move, because I don't need that move to trigger the teleportation anymore. I will create a new action. So in another word to say is I will create a new action to link to my new index, a new context file. Okay, so the new input action is called move SM, right? So it's a smooth locomotion. I did exactly the same strategy. So I basically go to the actions, right? And here I find the move, I right click, I duplicate it. So basically I create another, three new files, right? Action file, context file, and also the POM. Right? You have three new files. I know it's not everybody like this practice, but in my opinion, you should always not touch the old files in case something goes wrong. So I have this new VR POM, I have this new context, I have a new input. Okay, to just let you know, I have these three new files: context, action, input, and also the POM. All right, back here, um, then I'm starting to create a connection between them, right? So the first thing I want to do is in my, I will start maybe with my POM, right? So I will, well, let me start with my, I think I can start with the context file because we already opened this one. Why not? So in my context file, right, this is called default SM, double click. I deleted the one of these actions called move. I added this new action called move SM. As you can see, this new SM, where is it here? Double click is a 2D vector, right? It's not a 1D anymore. If you recall, the original move is used for teleport. You only need to teleport forward, right? So it's basically y-axis of your thumbstick. But now I maybe want to do not just move forward, I want to move sidewards as well. But later I actually didn't really register the side, but I can do this as a 2D, just to let you know. You have options. And also I have a modifier using the dead zone, so it will trim some of these values. All right, so I have this SM for move. Then I linked this into that. And here you can see I start to mapping. For the sake of demo, I only added for Oculus Touch, but definitely I should do this with HTC Vive, with Microsoft MR motion trackers. But I will do that later. Just not need to do this right now. Okay, so that's the right thumbstick, right, for this new smooth locomotion. Okay, I just for people who don't know how to do it, just click add. Here you can add this additional one, so I can do Vive. I can choose the new HTC Vive. Then I choose the part be consistent. I will do the right, and then I will do the axis of trackers. But I will do that later. Okay. All right. So we have this is done. Then the next thing I'm going to do is to uh, make sure I load this context file, this new one, right, called called default SM into my Pong, right? So this is the logic. You have to load it here. So back to my Pong, I have this new one in the blueprint. It's called VR Pong SM2. Double click, and I'm going to add a move. Because I want to do this as a character instead of a Pong, what I did is I go to the file, I go to the reparent, the blueprint, I reparent this as a character. So this is a very important part. If you don't do it, you have to do um, a lot of BP code to move. But if you switch parent to character, it has default move component. So it's pretty convenient. Another way you can really switch parent is go to, I think one of the functions called class. Um, but anyway, I usually just go here, reparent the blueprint. All right. So once you do that, it will basically add this new component here at the end. It's called character movement. It also create a new, this is called root, to host everything else. This root now is called capsule. It's basically a low poly geometry represent the collisions, right? So this is called capsule, right? Um, and I remember I moved the camera to the floor because if you don't do it, I think the character actually gonna register the camera to the eye level, which is push the thing up. That's the reason I actually push the camera to the floor. I will tell you more. Yeah, I think I did that just to make sure the eye level is correct. And also in the event graph at the beginning, I did change my tracking origin to the eye level. I think this is the two setting I did. So number one, change the camera to the floor. Number two, change the tracking origin to the eye level. Yeah, because it's tracking, understand where is your foot as x as a 000, then the height of your head mount display will be pushed, right? Push the camera to the right height, the eye level. Yep. So I did that. I did another really quick change is the capsule collision. I basically changed this to custom and I disabled some of these from the collision. I think I disabled the rigid, the physical body. The reason is it has some conflictions with grabbing. So if I grab a box and then the box became a collision object, then when I move, the character is being blocked by the box. So it's a little bit weird. So I think, well, I'm not really bothered to, collide the box with my body. Then I will just disable the, physics body. I think I disabled the vehicle as well because I'm not really driving. I disabled camera. So there is something you can disable from the collision. It will make your movement a little bit smoother. Not worry about the weapon or the box collide with your body. Yeah. So this is the quick setting I did for the VR Pong. So now is a character now, right? It has a movement component. It has some settings you can communicate through the BP, through the blueprint. Then in the event graph, I think I basically, since I'm not doing teleport anymore, I disabled this part of the script. Snap turn, I'm using a new way to do snap turn. Also, I disabled the teleport. I don't need teleport anymore. Um, I think the way you can disable is just pick the elements, right click, then you have this disable function, or you can just disconnect the link. Same thing. Um, I think if you don't have this option to disable the component, you probably have to do something. I remember it's in the settings. Probably it's in editor pre-reference. There are some settings you can turn on, turn off the debugging, turn off. I think it's a disable called. Yeah, I forgot exactly where I find that link. Um, think it's one of the blueprint. Um, so you can allow Unreal to disable a component. Well, I will leave that to you. Just search how to disable a component in Unreal. I think you have to um, trigger some of the setting here. Okay. Yeah, it's actually right here. Allow explicit impure node disabling. Yeah, just make sure check this option. It's tiny, but after that you should be able to disable some of the component you don't need. All right, so go back to the Pang, the character now. Is it the right one? Just want to make sure. No, this is the wrong one. Let me close the one I don't really need. First person default project set. Okay, so this is the Pang. I disabled the old one. Then let's set up some new logic for snap turn and also for the move, right? So here, let's start with the snap turn. Snap turn, I didn't using the original snap turn function because I think my script is a little bit easier to understand. So you basically trigger the snap turn, right? This is exactly the same. So if I take a look at the context, oh, by the way, I want to make sure I'm loading the new context, right? So here in the context mapping, you see here I'm loading this into the default SM. So this is my new context being loaded. And in my new context, I have the snap turn. So go back to my new context, right? SM, right? I have snap turn, which is called turn, action, turn. And I have this Oculus, right? This is from the original, some stick X, right? Some stick X, which is this. Also added this new one is called some stick Y. The right hand, left hand. I added right hand. So you can now do the some stick snapshot on both, on either of these motion controllers. I think that's a little bit handier to do that. And here I trigger that. And this is also from the old script. It is negative or positive. Basically, this depends on where you triggered push to the left or push to the right. Then I did this branch, yes or no. If it's in the right direction, then I will add the rotation 15 degrees. So it will rotate right, positively 15 degrees. If it's negative, I rotate negative 15 degrees. And this is the part I actually did my change is I changed the target to capsule. The reason is once I reparent the Pang to a character, right, the root is not the camera anymore. I think the root now is the capsule. So I have to rotate the capsule. If you get confused, capsule basically represents your body, right? So your body is the parent, the root of your, you know, the character. And you can see it doesn't have a rotation because the rotation is actually being controlled with the movement component, right? So this is the capsule. And also under the capsule, you have the children, right? So the camera, which is your head, is actually now is the children of your body, which makes sense because when you rotate your body, your head go with it, right? Your head is kind of attached to your body, so they have this kind of hierarchy. But also your head can move independently, right? So that's the kind of representing the biologic structure of a human figure. Your hand, both hand is the children of your body, which is a part of your capsule. I hope that makes sense to understand the hierarchies. All right, so now back to the event graph, and here we can see the logic is rotate 15 degrees, right? Each time you trigger the snapshot, either positive or negative, you rotate 15 degrees. If you think it's a little bit too slow, you can increase this number. That's how you trigger the rotation. Okay. Then let's talk quickly about trigger the move, which is not a teleport, it's a smooth move. In my opinion, this might trigger some motion sickness for some people, but it's a better way because in the real world we intend to move smoothly. We don't really teleport. But when we rotate, because we have two legs, the rotate is not really a smooth rotation. It's kind of like a snap, because when you move one leg first, then you rotate quickly. It's sort of like a snap rotation, but the move is the smooth move. Um, and here you see the same logic when you trigger the smooth locomotion move, which is, again, I already showed here, triggered by the right thumbstick, right? So if you trigger, then I add a movement input. This only work if you have this already defined as a character, right? So you trigger the move, and you need to define. Well, it's automatically linked to your target, which is self, your character. You need to define which direction to move, right? So in this case, I will just simply get the forward vector from the target yourself. Okay, so that is the orientation of your body as your direction to move. The scale, I will trigger this with the value y. So back to my right motion controller, when you push this thumbstick forward, which is y-axis, you trigger this, right? So the y value will be captured and use it to control the movement. And keep in mind, this one, I didn't add a filter to be positive. So this y could be backwards as well. That's the reason you are able to move both forward and backwards. Okay. And also the similar logic you can do with axis x, which is left and the right. Theoretically, you could trigger the movement to make this kind of like a move horizontally. But you see, I didn't really use it. The reason is I think it's awkward. Although you can trigger this through your right vector, which is point to the right side. So if you move this way, right, you can just doing this kind of move. It's not really natural in my opinion. So I disabled that action. You are not able to move horizontally. Although we have this value captured from the y-axis. So if you do want to move horizontally, you have to actually do this snap. You have to snap 15 degrees, then you move forward, backward. So that's kind of my logic to set up here for the movement. Okay, so I think that's it. This is everything I want to set as a smooth locomotion. Then let's do a test to see if that works or not. So before I do that, I will make sure I save everything. Right? And in the VR mode, because right now it's still pointing to the old Pong, I have to switch to the VR Pong SM2, which is a character, right? The new one I created. That's the reason I think this will become pretty handy, because you are not destroying any of the old stuff, right? You're just pointing to the new character. That's it, right? The new character has a new context and also has a new action embedded in it. I do want to mention, because the hierarchy, you do want to make sure the context, the new context, is a part of the PMI, the config. The reason is, in the PMI, the config file, I have my old one, right? And also make sure you add this new one in. Otherwise, when you package, you might not be able to register the new context, right? So the new context has to be loaded here in the config. The number here represent the priority, so which one should be prioritized. So I did this as a 1, but I think 0 should work as well, because we are not really loading or to replace, because this two does not coexist at the same time. So there's actually no conflict, right? So if you know default and default SM never being loaded into a same level, never, right? You could theoretically put them in the same priorities, but I put them in a different just in case, because it might generate some conflict. Yeah, so they are the priorities. Okay. So now I'm going to just simply play and let's see if that works or not. So I'm using the new character. I'm doing the standalone game to simulate. And I will wear my headset. I'm probably just using my right hand, because right now the smooth locomotion is being registered. So I have my one hand here, another hand here. Okay, but I'm just using my right. Oh, this is left. Okay, this is right. Can't tell. All right, here we go. So now if I do the snap turn, right, I'm still doing this 15-degree now. It's now 45. And now if I push my thumbstick forward, I can move forward, I can backwards, right? So forward, backwards, rotate, forward, backward, rotate, forward, backward. So if I really want to go into the room now, instead of move horizontally, I have to rotate, right? And then move forward, then rotate a little bit, move forward, rotate a little bit, move forward, rotate a little bit, move forward. So this is sort of the same kind of behavior you have in the real world, instead of move horizontally. But again, this probably needs some calibration to 15 degree may not be the right number. It's a little bit too slow. But you have this forward, backward. If I push horizontally, this is just a snap rotation, snap rotation, right? Snap turn. It's not move horizontally. I believe you can still be able to interact with the boxes. Yep, you can still grab the gun. So this is all the same, no difference. But now you have this smooth locomotion. Again, this could be motion sickness for some people, but for the architectural visualization purpose, this is a little bit better. You do see I disabled the collision between the body, which is the capsule, with the physical objects. So if I step to the ball, I'm not able to really push the ball, right? Because my body do not have a collision, but I still have, my way to be able to grab. So I can still grab the ball. I can, you know, throw it away. So that's kind of the trade-off you have in order to make the smooth a little bit more friendly in this. So snap, move, snap, move. Okay. So now, oh, by the way, I can still be able to trigger the pop-up toggle, right? So it's still there, and on my finger is moving. I think there's something wrong with the three fingers for grip, but I will take a look at later. Maybe there's something uh, should be reset. Okay, so let me quit. All right, I think that's it. This is all about how to set up locomotion here in Unreal 5.1.